So
Yep.
there are financial issues. There are age issues. There are fit issues, personality issues. There are so many issues here that I just see could be really bogging down Philly for at least a handful of years.
More obviously, Ben Simmons has still held out the entire season and has just been in trade rumors for months and months and months. And it seemed, based on the chatter, Daryl Morey gave the interview a week or two ago on the radio where he's like, it's less likely than likely that we're going to move him by the deadline. Kyle Neubeck of Philly Voice, who's been doing a great job covering this whole saga, he publishes a story Friday afternoon saying, like, look, it's there you are, it's serious. He's probably going to stay here past the deadline. And then Shams Charania comes out with the Friday at 5 p.m. news dump of he said that the Sixers have been waiting and been plotting to wait until the offseason to chase James Harden, but they may not have to wait that long after all. He said they are expected to pursue Harden in the coming days, and the Nets are believed to be open to discussing a deal. There is expectation that they will engage in a dialogue on a deal around Simmons and Harden. He pointed out, Philly has Seth Curry, Tyrese Maxey, Matisse Thybulle that could sweeten a potential package. He says the Nets are not feeling any urgency to make this move, but, quote, it's believed that an opening exists should an offer elevate the team and make the roster more well-rounded as the franchise pursues a championship. So, what do you make of all of this?
Oh, where to start? So first and foremost, I'm not a fan of the James Harden pending contract that looms in the near distance. Sure. First and foremost, I also think he's diminished as a basketball player. I think we're seeing that this year, and I have legitimate fear that he's going to further decline next year and the year after that because he's got a ton of miles on him. I cannot for the life of me understand the enthusiasm there is about James Harden, but I also understand the enthusiasm, though, in terms of just getting over this Ben Simmons saga, nightmare, whatever the hell you want to call it. Because at the end of the day, Sixers fans and the NBA atmosphere at large, they were kind of uncertain what is Ben Simmons' value even. Like, there were rumblings, could you even get a CJ McCollum for him? Because people were basically out on him. Right. Now that name has flipped to James Harden, which obviously is better than CJ McCollum, but I think it's fair to also recognize that Harden's diminishment has played a factor in maybe those two trade values aligning. Because if he had been the James Harden of old in Houston, no way they would have been able to even have a discussion about this. So I'm on so many minds of this, Bryan. In one thing is I'm very, very skeptical. Like, I'm just assuming this trade is going to go through. I'm gonna assume right now it's going to be Ben Simmons and stuff for James Harden. And stuff does not include Tyrese Maxey. We'll get back to that because I will. Daryl Morey follows me on Twitter, and I will send him an angry DM if he trades Tyrese Maxey.
You will not be the only one, believe me.
Yeah. But so let's stay with the Harden thing.
Yep.
The one thing I already went through, like the contract, and what is, just to clarify, like what is his contract extension, or I don't know if it's going to be an extension or just a re-sign, but what would his max be in Philadelphia? Okay. Let's just get that out of the way first.
So if they do not trade for him by the deadline,
right?
He's with Brooklyn through the end of the season. Come July 1st, he can sign a 5-year, $269.9 million deal with Brooklyn. He can sign a 4-year, $200.1 million deal in a sign and trade or as a free agent with any other team. And then, as I wrote about at Forbes, I think the most logical option for him, if he were to want to leave Brooklyn but doesn't happen by the deadline, he would pick up his player option, which is about $47.4 million. As part of a trade. Morey did with this with Chris Paul back in 2017. He'd be eligible for a 4-year extension 6 months after, so give or take somewhere in January. And the total value of that deal would be 5 years, $274.7 million.
Yeah, thank you. So those three numbers, 274, 269, and 201, correct?
To 200.1. And I should clarify, if the Sixers do trade for him at the deadline, they will inherit his bird rights, so they would be able to offer him the 5-year $269.9 million right off the bat July 1st.
I would have a problem with any deal that starts in the $200 million range at this point. He is not worth that. That is where I am going to be dying on this hill. I know that people are still very enthused about Harden. I get that. But look, he's going to be 33 this year. We've seen a diminishment. We've also seen, Bryan, that he does not necessarily have a good reputation when it comes to playing alongside stars. I mean, it didn't work out with Dwight Howard, who at the time was a star. Just like, let's just remember that. This wasn't the Dwight Howard of current day. I mean, this was Dwight Howard, superstar center. It didn't work out with Chris Paul. It didn't work out with Russell Westbrook. Right now, it seems to not be working out with Kyrie Irving. Kevin Durant is a little bit different, I think. That those two aren't necessarily on the same page. They also played before, but it isn't one of those egregious relationships. But it's enough of concern for me that if Harden gets traded to Philly, will he accept Joel Embiid, who has a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Audacious personality, flamboyant personality. He is someone who can occasionally rub people the wrong way. He's very opinionated. And I wonder, will those two fit personality-wise? And I don't think it should be on Joel to fix that if Harden comes in. Joel should not be in this kind of move where, oh, James Harden is going to come in, so I need to alter my personality. No. He's the primary guy on this team. Make no mistake. If Harden goes to Philly, he will not be the number one guy there. Joel Embiid is still the number one player. Will Harden accept that? I have no idea, but it's a legitimate concern considering what we've seen in the past. So there are financial issues. There are age issues. There are fit issues, personality issues. There are so many issues here that I just see could be really bogging down Philly for at least a handful of years. And also the age factor. Like, if you want to maximize Joel Embiid's prime, and you and I have talked a lot about wasting a prime year and like how many years does he have left, do you really go with a guy who's going to turn 33 this year? Is that the right approach? Who is, fair to say, on the downward trajectory? Is that the right play? I think no. But I mean, I know you're in the other camp, so I'd like to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, well, I will say Mo Dakhel of The Athletic and a Bleacher Report posted an article at BR today presenting your case as well. Like, he does not think that the Sixers should go after Harden. He thinks they should go after Beal or Dame or Jaylen Brown. He also threw in Donovan Mitchell, which I thought was interesting in case things go really south there. You know, I think the obvious counterpoint to that is, are we sure that any of those guys want to come to Philly? Like, it sounds like if Dame ever does want to leave Portland, there was one report recently that he wants to stay on the West Coast. He's also been tied to New York a bunch. So I don't know that the Sixers would be on the top of his list if he ever does have that change of heart. You know, right. Bradley Beal shares a trainer in Drew Hanlon with Joel Embiid, so I think he would probably be more open to it than it sounds like Dame is. But again, like, is he going to ask out either now ahead of the trade deadline or sometime this summer? Or are you going to wait until 2023? And at that point, you're having Ben Simmons hold out for 2 years. Like, unless they have pretty good intel that Bradley Beal is going to become available sometime in the next 5 months and he would have Philly number one. And, you know, with Mitchell and Jaylen Brown, those guys are under contract. So the Sixers would have to outbid whoever else tried to get those guys if either of their teams do make them available.
Right, and Utah would not be interested in a Simmons trade, I imagine, because that team would be all defense, no offense.
Right, I would think. Yeah, I mean, like, you could have the two top defensive player of the year candidates from last year paired together, but I would think they would maybe just try to spin him off to a third team. The point is, like, of the potential stars who are going to become available or could become available in the next year, it sounds like Harden is the most realistic target for them. And I totally hear the personality concerns in particular with Harden and clashing with star teammates before. My two things that I'd push back a little bit are, one, I mean, who is more familiar with James Harden at this point than Daryl Morey? Like, if anyone is aware of what went wrong in Houston, it's Daryl Morey, and maybe he'd be able to step in and fix some of those things before they ever become a problem. Like,
but you can also have a blind eye to people that you have a high level of affection for.
Yeah, and I mean that's been one of the criticisms of Daryl, is that he undervalues chemistry and like the human side of team building, and that he like is an assets guy instead of a like focus on the building relationships part. And maybe that's a place where Elton Brand could step in and have a role. For all of Doc Rivers' flaws as a X's and O's tactician, I think like getting buy-in from stars in particular tends to be, at least early in the Stars tenure, that tends to be one of his strong suits. So, that Sixers also have history with Mike D'Antoni. He was assistant coach for them under Brett Brown. I would not be surprised if they tried to bring him back to the organization in some capacity. Tad Brown was the former, I think, the CEO of the Rockets. He's now the CEO of the Sixers, and James Harden loves that guy apparently. So like, there are a bunch of ties here that would make me think, I agree with you. Like, Joel Embiid's always going to be the number one in Philly because he's the homegrown star and he's turned into this MVP candidate. But I would hope he would be willing to cede some of the spotlight and make it a 1 and 1A thing instead of like a clear, like, I'm the star and you're beneath me. Because I don't think he cares about that kind of stuff, honestly. I think
that wasn't what I was trying to allude to. It's more so Harden trying to come in and maybe try to function as a number one guy. I think the reason I brought up the being number one for Embiid is he's better. Like now, Embiid is just flat out the better basketball player, which is why I would still want the team to be tailored towards his strengths and what he provides.
Yeah, and I will say, I hear the concerns like basketball fit wise with Embiid and Harden, that Embiid's never really been a strong pick and roll player. But one, he's never had a guard like James Harden. I mean, we're seeing more of it this season with Tyrese Maxey because this is the first time he's played with a guard like Tyrese Maxey. I think with Harden, he would, he is willing to adapt his game to his teammates, as he's shown with Ben Simmons in past years and with Maxey this year. And I'd also say, like, Harden has never played with a big man like Joel Embiid. I mean, Dwight Howard and Clint Capella are probably the two best bigs he's ever played with. And both of those guys are in a similar mold of, you're not going to get much offensively out of them, like from more than 5 feet from the basket. And you're not going to be running post-ups for them. Like, they are, lob threats, dunk threats, offensive rebounders. They're good rebounders in general, good shot blockers, but you're not going to run plays for Clint Capella. Whereas Joel Embiid has very much shown that you are going to run your entire offense through him. So, like, there's a chance that they do this trade and it goes very badly, but there's also a chance that it could work out. Like, if both of those guys are on board and Doc can, get them both to buy into what he's selling, and Morey and, Tad Brown, Elton Brand, everyone in the organization can get those two on the same page. Like, I understand why the Sixers are chasing it, because that upside is palpable. I think the question is, if you're the Sixers right now, we've talked a lot about, if they wait for a sign and trade, given what guys Jimmy and Kyle Lowry in recent years have gotten in sign and trades, it's not a ton. Like, you could conceivably think, all right, we get to the summer and we're going to say it's James Harden for Ben Simmons straight up. And that's, the Nets should be happy to take that. But, the Nets will counter with, okay, well, we can do that, but you're going to punt this year of Embiid. And again, who knows how long he's going to last. So we're willing to give you him now. We're willing to let you have this year to actually contend for a title, but we want more. Where's the line for you with, it sounds like Tyrese Maxey is already a line.
Oh, for sure.
But who else would you not be willing to include in that trade? Because I just posted a piece at Forbes Sports earlier today with a couple trade ideas. They need to include, I think it was like 2.1 million more in salary, something like that, or a little bit more than 2 million in salary, just to make it cap legal.
Right. No, now you're forcing me to pull up Spotrac then.
Well, I mean, anyone other than like Isaiah Joe and Paul Reed can't do it alone.
Right. Well, I've seen I've seen Seth Curry being floated as an option. I hate that. I would not do that.
Interesting. Okay. You would, so just Ben and Seth for James Harden, you would not do.
No. And again, I know that I will be in the minority here. I'm well aware, but that's because I just have that little faith in this project going right. And I understand everything you just said. I hear you on that. And I think your point about buying in is valid, but I also think Harden is the ultimate proof that he can buy in initially, and then a year down the line, he can buy out again. Yeah. He can check out. And for your points about the pick and roll things, and Mo also brought this up on PR, I actually don't think offensively it's going to be much of an issue, to be perfectly honest. I get what Mo was saying. Don't worry, it's not like I'm disagreeing with Mo on X's and O's, because I'd be an idiot to do that. But I don't think that's the biggest hurdle. For me, it's defense. Could you just imagine how Embiid is going to feel if Harden just completely checks out of the game defensively, and guys are just going by him and Joe has to clean up? That is going to lead to a verbal lashing, which Harden historically does not take well at all. And that's why I just see so many potential downsides. I think overall my point is, I think if this deal goes down, a lot more has to go right than wrong for this to be successful. Yeah, that's where I'm at, and that's why I'm hesitant.
I think that's a fair stance. Like, you can easily see the pitfalls here.
Yeah.
Where I mean, you had this point when the Nets acquired KD and Kyrie in the first place. Like, the upside was there, and when they got James Harden, especially, like, they are still, despite all of their issues right now on FanDuel, they are still considered the title favorites this season.
Yeah.
Like, it is the upside of those three guys alone is terrifying. And they showed it again in the game against the Bulls earlier, but now we are a year and a half into this thing, and they've played 16 games, all three of them together.
Wow.
And, I think especially this Joe Harris is another wrinkle to factor in, both, to their willingness to trade Harden and how it might affect trade talks between these two teams in particular, because his agent told Woj the other day that he might need a second surgery to address the ankle issue that's been keeping him out since November. He told reporters Friday that he's optimistic that he's going to be back this year, confident he's going to be back this year, but the Nets might not be willing to make that gamble with Harden and Kyrie both able to become free agents this summer. Like, can they wait for Joe Harris? So, a couple of my ideas at Forbes were if the Sixers aren't going to give Tyrese Maxey, because I agree, I don't think they will now or this summer. They like him too much. What they can offer
let's just say 1 minute, because I'm sorry to interrupt you on this, but I think it's important that we actually just take 1 minute to discuss Tyrese Maxey, because there are going to be a lot of listeners out there who's going to pick up this episode because it's trade deadline driven, who may not have listened to us before. And that's why I wanted just to let people know how we feel about Tyrese Maxey on this show. First and foremost, this is a guy who should be hands off. This is a guy who has all-star potential, who might actually become an all-star next year. I mean, Darius Garland made it this year. He's not far off. He is a jitter. I think you call him a jitterbug. He is one of the fastest, smaller guards in the NBA. He gets into the paint. He can shoot. He can score off the drive. He can dish. He's an active defender. His motor is insane. There's no way he should be made available unless you get an in prime superstar instead of an aging superstar.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Go on. My apologies. I thought it was.
You're right. And I was on the Ball podcast with Tro Brodu the other day, and he was asking because there were I think Coach Cal went on the radio the other day, and Doc Rivers apparently told him that they're not trading Tyrese Maxey under any circumstances. Yeah. And he was asking me when would you trade Tyrese, and what would you who would you package him for with Ben? And I was like, I mean, at that point, you're talking a top 10 player, at least a top 5 almost, because you're already doing Ben, who is a 3-time All-Star. So he's top 25, 30, somewhere in that range. And then, with Tyrese's upside, no, you don't do that. I was saying, if anything, I would, if you're trying to trade Tyrese or you're willing to trade him, use him to get off the Tobias Harris contract and then trade Ben in a separate package. But I don't think that's going to happen. The Sixers love Tyrese Maxey. They are, and I think not only his upside and the development that he's shown from last year to this year and his work ethic they've raved about, but his personality, he just seems like a genuinely great kid. And I think that is infectious in the locker room. And I hate to use the word infectious after the past 2 years, but like the first time you used it in a good context of the past 2 years, like I think that will spill over to his teammates. His teammates seem to love him too. So yeah, I think he is off limits. So that was one of the 3 ideas I wrote about at Forbes, just because I think that's probably where the Nets start and the Sixers say no. And they're like, but we can offer you some additional help, even if it's not Tyrese Maxey. So with the Joe Harris stuff factored in, I thought one way to get this deal done is James Harden and Joe Harris for Ben Simmons, Danny Green, and Seth Curry. Would you do that deal from either side?
Well, you do get Joe Harris back, even though he might not play this year. He would likely be available next year, so you do get an elite shooter, and that's really the point of it for me. Why I'm reluctant to trade away Seth, because if there's an elite shooter out there, it's Seth. I mean,
yeah, right.
What is he like? Has he taken over like the all-time leader in 3-point field goal percentage? I think if not, he's close to it.
Actually, I just looked this up for this article. He is a career 43.8% 3-point shooter. Joe Harris is a career 43.9% 3-point shooter.
Okay.
So Joe Harris is a better 3-point shooter than Seth Curry. But yeah, I mean, they're similar in that regard. And my logic, I guess I should have explained this before I asked you whether you would take it for both teams. For the Nets, if you are not sure that Joe Harris is coming back this year, you're effectively trading James Harden for Simmons and then 2 guys like starter caliber players in Curry and Green. Right. You shave you shave almost $55 million off of your tax bill this year. You're projected right now to pay $110.4 million. You go to 56.9 after this. Danny Green, fully non-guaranteed $10 million salary next year. So if tax issues were a concern next year, you could get off of his contract. Yeah. And like Simmons, Durant, Irving, Seth Curry, Danny Green, small ball 5 unit.
Yeah.
Like that could cook, man.
Yeah. I like that framework though. If we're going the Harden route, I like that simply because you also get Joe Harris back in Philly. That's to me the entire Joel Embiid, James Harden relationship is going to work off of having release valves. Yeah. That is really going to be the whole thing. You need to have the shooters around them, so when they get crowded, they have an opening. They have guys on the perimeter. I mean, hell, Tobias Harris, I know that he's had a down year. I know that Philly Sports Radio are trying to get him traded. I understand all of that. But if he's left alone, I trust him as a shooter. I mean, with all the attention going to James and to Joel and Joe Harris next year when they come back fully healthy, hell yeah, I trust Tobias Harris to make an open shot. I mean, that would be a very potent lineup, assuming, of course, again, and I'm reiterating myself again, that James Harden doesn't diminish or regress dramatically. Like I think it's even fair to ask the question whether he should have been an All-Star this year. But I know you want to dedicate an entire episode just to going to All-Star reserves, so I'll save that chatter for another time.
Fair. Yeah. Okay.
But the framework overall, I don't mind it. Let me just put it that way. Simply because you get the elite shooter back, it's decent value. And also you're not giving up Tyrese Maxey, which right. To me is like everything.
Yeah, like I think Joe Harris's injury, because if he wasn't hurt, I don't think the Nets consider this.
Right.
But because he is hurt and because you can't bank on him coming back this year necessarily, like I think that is the most interesting framework that I've seen floated out there. Like I threw it out there yesterday, and obviously I've seen a ton of different trade ideas since Shams' report came out. Like I think this is probably, if the Sixers had to throw in their 2022 first round pick to further incentivize the Nets, fine. But like, I think the Sixers would be like, yo, we are saving you $55 million in tax. Yeah. Like, you can't ask for that much more. The other idea, push back. If you're the Nets.
No. If I'm Philly and the Nets come asking for a first rounder.
Oh yeah.
I would push back for that exact reason. So I'm agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah. My other idea, again, this is going to save the Nets a lot of tax, but it's like less exciting in terms of the other players involved. It was Ben Simmons, Furkan Korkmaz, and Paul Reed going to the Nets. James Harden, Paul Millsap, Javon Carter going to the Sixers. It doesn't save the Nets as much. It's $10.5 million off, so their tax bill goes to $63.1 million. So again, like close to $50 million. All of the guys in this trade, other than Simmons and Harden, are less consequential than a Joe Harris, Danny Green, or Seth Curry.
Did you call Paul Reed unconsequential?
In the NBA, yes. In the G League, no.
I mean, I'm gonna have to talk to John Hollinger first before we trade.
Yeah. Well, maybe he'd be excited that Paul Reed might actually get to play.
Yeah. No. Okay. So that to me aligns more in regards to the value that I think you should be willing to give up for Harden. And again, I understand that a lot of people think that's sacrilegious, but I really have to pound this point home. This is not Houston Rockets James Harden anymore.
Right.
I mean, you and I both have to go into this fully agreeing that this is not that guy anymore. It's still a very good player, absolutely, but it's not that guy, and that's why we're pushing back on the whole, what was the normal going rate for someone like him, like 2 All-Stars and like 4 draft picks and
every single pick,
exactly. Like that is not the haul that you should expect if you're a Nets fan right now to get from James Harden.
Yeah, I mean, because there's the threat. Like, I think what happens is if the Nets say Maxey or bust, or like Thibault and Curry plus Simmons or bust, the Sixers will be like, all right, cool. We'll call you in 5 months when James Harden's a free agent and you are SOL because he wants to come here, and that's just how the league works. And you're going to settle for Ben Simmons straight up because that's how the league works. So like, you could take our best offer now. Like, I do think it's gross to even say that the tax savings could be a major incentive for the Nets, because this is not at all how they should be thinking when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving hypothetically in their prime, or for Kyrie at least like in your prime half the time. But yeah, I think it is, $50 million is a ton of money to save. So I think that would be one of the big selling points in either of those trades. So all of that is to say, like, I think there are frameworks that could make sense for both teams before the deadline. And I do think, like, obviously going from Harden to Simmons is a downgrade for Brooklyn. But I think that if KD and Kyrie, especially if Kyrie resigns this summer, like those two guys could help cover up a lot of Ben's weaknesses, and Ben can fill a lot of holes on that team. Like, he's not going to score as much as James Harden does, but you don't necessarily need that when you have KD and Kyrie anyway. And, a Patty Mills or a Cam Thomas, who's like, all that dude does is score buckets.
Oh, Like his 16 points per game is actually going to be very adequate on that team. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. And then he can fill the playmaking void that Harden's going to leave a much, much, much better defender. So he's going to actually help KD. KD's not going to have to take the best wing or the best guard. Like that goes to Ben, and then KD can save some of his energy on that end of the floor. So I think this deal will make both teams better. It's just the Nets are going to be pissed about it. And like, how much blood are they going to try to extract from the Sixers because they are bad about how this deal went down?
Right. And also, there are certain levels here to the Nets getting Simmons that I really enjoy. First thing is, Kyrie is such a creative ball handler that even when teams double him, like sending a defender over from Simmons because he can't shoot, that doesn't matter because Kyrie can dribble himself out of double teams. He is that good of a ball handler. So I think that kind of negates one of those perceived weaknesses that they would have in having a non-shooter on the floor. At the same time, it's also worth noting that Ben Simmons, according to, was it Ramona Shelburne, is now vaccinated. So that means he would not be in a similar situation as Kyrie, where he would be missing half the games. That is suddenly a huge incentive for the Nets to actually be interested in him in the first place. Because otherwise, could you imagine having two guys of that caliber sitting out? I mean, that would have been a non-starter.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the news came out this week that he's vaccinated. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, I'm not going to elaborate further, but I agree with you. Yes, it's a dirty, dirty business.